भद्रं कर्णैभिः शृणुयामदेवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैस्तुष्टुवागंसस्तनूभिः व्यशेमदेवहितं यदायुः ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Let us now pray together. We offer our salutations to the all-loving being who endows all beings with consciousness. We meditate on the Lord, who is the origin of the universe. Lord, Thou abidest in all, Thou art all, Thou assumest all forms, Thou art the origin and goal of all, Thou art the self of all, Thou art existence, knowledge and bliss. Salutations unto Thee. May the world be peaceful, may the wicked become gentle, may all creatures think of mutual welfare, may their minds be occupied with what is spiritual and abiding. May our hearts be immersed in selfless love for the Lord. Let us have a moment of meditation. Let us feel the presence of all-pervading divine within us. That is our true self. Let us feel our shapes are gone, like the shapes of the ice cubes kept in a warm room. Even as ice cubes, they are intrinsically one. In that oneness, there is no space, no time, no coming or going. All is love. All is bliss. All is peace. Om, peace, peace, peace. Dear friends, I am very happy that today's illustrious speaker, Reverend Father Francis X. Clooney, the Jesuit priest and monk, has come to address us. He teaches comparative religion at Harvard. Before that, he was teaching at the Boston College. He is a great friend of Vedanta and a scholar of rare achievements combined with deep devotional practice. This combination is not easy to find. Those who are, I see that at Brown University very often, those who are associated with the divinity school or the Department of Religious Studies, they kind of scoff at those who are at the chaplain's office. Oh, you are practitioners. You do not study seriously like we do. But that should not be taken in this way, that you can be either a practitioner or exclusive from that, a serious student of religion. Here we find a person who deeply combines the intense scholasticity as well as the deep spirit of spiritual or religious practice. He teaches comparative religion, and his knowledge of Hinduism is tremendous. Means I cannot come even close to that. It is, let me just read a list of few books that he has written about this connection between Christianity and Hinduism. That thinking ritually, retrieving the Purva Mimamsa of Jaimini, theology after Vedanta, an experiment in comparative theology, beyond compare, Saint Francis de Sales and Sri Vedanta Deshika in loving surrender to God, the truth, the way, the life, Christian commentary on the three holy mantras of Srinivasa. This is Hindus. Then comparative theology, deep learning across religious borders. And then there is this book, his hiding place is darkness, a Hindu Catholic theopoetics of divine absence. Beautiful title. I would like to read this book. Recent books include reading the Hindu and Christian classics, why and how it matters, and Western Jesuit scholars in India. So today I have requested him to speak on the idea of worship of Divine Mother in Hindus and in Christians. So he has chosen a beautiful topic, Mother Kali, Mother Mary, and the compassion of God. So without standing between you and him for too long, I now request Father Clooney to begin his talk.
Thank you. Good afternoon. So I'm very happy to be here with you today. It's an honor to me to be able to come to the Providence Vedanta Society at the invitation of Swami Yogatmananda. We were talking before and think that this is my third visit. I came maybe 10 years ago and maybe 5 years ago, and so it is always good to come back here to Providence, and particularly on such a beautiful day. As Swami said, I've had a long interconnection with the Ramakrishna order. I remember when I was in India back in the 80s and 90s, Swami Lokeshwarananda in Gold Park, the Cultural Institute, invited me to come and give some talks there. I've gone to Belur Mutt several times, very honored to go to the very central place, Dakshineshwar. Swami Chaitanananda in St. Louis has asked me to read some of his texts sometimes and make some comments and so on like that. And on and on. Was very happy last year, before COVID, to have Swami Sarvapriyananda from New York spend a year on the Harvard campus. And he, of course, is a very eloquent speaker and a wonderful person to have around. And then for many, many years, my two very good friends, Vrajapana from Santa Barbara, who I understand may be here visiting soon, next week. And then my real friend in Boston, Swami Tyagananda of the Boston Center. We team taught a course last year on Hindu ministry, and we worked very well together. So it's very pleasing to me to be here with you today. So when Swami asked me to come and to speak, I was thinking of the general theme of God as Mother, and then also thinking of God as Mother in 2021, a time in the world when things are not well, a time when not only has COVID devastated the human race, as we know in this country, over 700,000 people have died. In India, many, many people have died. In other parts of the world, terrible suffering that is not over with yet. And there is also terrible environmental damage being done around the world, terrible degradation of Mother Nature. There are also endless wars, poverty that is crushing many people. And we live in a time when we simply not think of God as Mother, but also think of the power and the necessity of the compassion of God. That we somehow have to be open to the compassion of God, God's mercy upon us, but also suffering with God, God suffering with us, and somehow helping us to understand as a human race and find our way through the terrible suffering of the year 2021. What I would like to do is to lead you in a somewhat complicated fashion into the theme that I have proposed for today by telling you about where I was earlier today. And I promise I will get to everything that I promised Swami that I would talk about eventually. So I came today because every Sunday I go to the Catholic Church in Sharon, Massachusetts. And I think many of you know where Sharon is. If you're driving from here to Boston, about halfway up 95, you pass the exit for Sharon and Walpole. And a little Catholic church I've been going to for almost 25 years on Sundays to the same parish. And as you may know, in the Catholic tradition, we don't choose our readings on Sunday, but we're simply given readings. They're given to us, they're assigned by the church, and we have to make something of them. And this morning, it struck me as very providential here in Providence that my reading that I was given as the main reading was a gospel passage from the Gospel according to St. Mark. And in St. Mark chapter 10, there is this passage where the apostles are kind of competing with one another to get the first place. James and John want to sit with Jesus when he's on his throne. They want the throne to the left and the throne to the right. So they're imagining great pomp and circumstance. And Jesus tells them, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't understand me even though you have been with me all this time. But rather it is important for you to understand that being a follower of me, sent by God into the world, is not about sitting on thrones. It's not about having power. It's not about being in charge, but it's about serving the people. And if you really want to be with me, you have to enter on my mission and walk with me through all the villages of Palestine as we head our way toward Jerusalem. And the beautiful gospel passage ends by this. You cannot be like the Gentiles, whose lords lord it over them, whose officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to be great among you must become your servant. Whoever wants to be first must be the slave of all. Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as the ransom for many. So Jesus came to suffer, to serve, to help the people. We are called to be part of the same mission, I found the gospel to say. And to reinforce it, the church gave as a first reading a very short passage from the prophet Isaiah. And the prophet Isaiah in chapter 53 says this, "The Lord was pleased to crush his beloved in infirmity. If he gives his life for an offering for sin, he shall see his descendants in a long life, and the will of God shall be accomplished through him. Because of his affliction, he shall see the light in fullness of days. Because of his suffering, my servant shall justify many, and their guilt shall he bear. And this seemed to me to be a theme about the compassion of God manifest in the ministry, in the life, in the story of Jesus. That he was taking on himself, as prophesied by the prophet Isaiah, the suffering of the people around him, and was somehow bringing this suffering to himself in order to purify it, to redeem it, and to alleviate the suffering of people nearby to him. Follow-up point, the parish that I go to, this parish on Sunday, is of all names Our Lady of Sorrows. And it's a very fitting title to go with our theme today, Compassion of God, Mother Mary, Mother Kali. Because Mary in this parish is honored since 1900 as Our Lady of Sorrows, who is with Jesus in his time of sorrow, but also then is with everyone in their times of sorrow. If you come to the church in Sharon, it's easy to get to. There's a large statue out on the front lawn outside the church of Mary holding the body of the deceased Jesus. I think many of you have seen the Pietà, which is at St. Peter's in Rome. A replica, not great art, but a replica of that statue where Mary is holding the body of her son as part of his suffering, her suffering with him. And I think it gives a tone to the parish and a tone to the reading we heard today, and in fact a tone to my coming here, that at Our Lady of Sorrows parish, where Mary is holding the body of her deceased son, there is a sense of the overflowing compassion of God. I think you may know the passage, very short passage from John chapter 19, which talks about this intimate relationship between Mary and Jesus. Near the cross of Jesus stood his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother there, and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to her, "Woman, here is your son." And he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, the disciple took her into his home. And I think by tradition, this is not simply Mary was at the cross, her son was dead, and somebody needed to care for her in her old age. But rather this kind of symbolic union between Mary, Jesus who died on the cross, and all the disciples, all the followers, all the people who suffer in the world. They would take each other into their homes and be together in the compassion of God. And so it kind of brought out in a very deep way a sense of what this compassion means. The beautiful medieval hymn, Stabat Mater, the mother standing by the cross, has some verses I'll read to you just that kind of capture the spirit of what this parish is, Our Lady of Sorrows. The first verse, the sorrowful mother was standing there in tears, near the cross as her son was hanging there, and through her sighing soul that shared his sadness and was sorrowing, a sword pierced. Who are those who would not weep should they look upon the mother of Christ in such sadness? Who would be unable to share the sadness of the Holy Mother, to contemplate her sorrowing with her son? And then the speaker turns to Mary herself. O Virgin, famous among virgins, be not harsh toward me now, but make me weep with you. Help me to carry the death of Christ in my own soul, a share of his passion as I recollect his wounds. So all of this morning was really making me think about the theme that I had promised to speak on today, about the suffering of God, compassion in a suffering world, and what it means for us to say that God is like our mother. God is Mother Kali, God is Mother Mary, and somehow is with us in our suffering, as you'll see, not necessarily taking it away, waving a wand and it's gone, but rather helping us to find God in our experiences, even the worst of the experiences. Now, I need not tell you any great stories about the suffering of Sri Ramakrishna, but I found several passages to begin with where it makes it very clear that he had a sense that he too, child of Kali, devotee of Kali, saw his life, his suffering, as the suffering of the community around him. This is a quote from Swami Abhedananda. It may be asked why the Master had cancer. As you know, he died of cancer. It was really difficult to answer this question. Once, while staying in Shampuhur house, the Master had said, "The Divine Mother has shown me that people are getting rid of their sins even by touching my feet. I am absorbing the results of their sinful actions, so I am suffering from this terrible cancer. This is vicarious atonement," and the Swami adds, just like that of Jesus. So somehow when people came to Ramakrishna in his time of suffering and his cancer, would humbly touch his feet, that somehow there was a sense that he could take their burdens from them. Or later on, Swami Premananda says this, "No matter what people said, the Master helped people in trouble. When he himself was suffering excruciating pain from cancer, every day he would wait for seekers of God to come." And we see this as a theme right to the end of the Gospel of Ramakrishna, that even when he was in terrible pain, always looking out the window almost to say, when are people coming? When are people coming? Because I'm here for their sake. As long as I live, I want seekers to come and to be here in my presence. And he would become worried about why people weren't coming, and people were holding back because they knew he was sick and so on. But they began to come because they knew that he wanted this. And so when he was scolded saying, "Watch out for your health and don't be out there caring for these people all the time," he went into the Panchavati, into the grove by the temple, where he had his visions, and there the mother told him, "What a fool you could be. Have you come into this world for your own enjoyment and pleasure? Shame on you." Then the Master said, "Mother, if for the good of humanity I could suffer 1,000,000 times, I would bear it gladly." And somehow a sense that the mother did not take his suffering away from him, saying, "Oh, Ramakrishna, you are too good to suffer," but rather gave meaning to his suffering and gave it a sense of connection with all those who came to him. So what I did, being a professor type, I decided, how would I talk to you about this theme today? And Swami had reminded me that this was just the season of Durga Puja. Navaratri, Dussehra, I think, was on Friday. And so a great time of the year for thinking of Mother Durga, Mother Kali, thinking of the presence of the mother in the community. So I went to the Gospel of Ramakrishna and looked, as you know, every section is dated. So October 1882, October 1883, October 1884, and finally October 1885, all mentioning that it was the time of Durga Puja, and that the conversations that were taking place at Durga Puja. If I had weeks, although you probably don't need me for this, it'd be beautiful to go through all the passages in the Gospel that talk about Durga Puja to see what it was like to live in those times with Sri Ramakrishna. But I focused on 1885, the last of them, because as you know, he'll die the next year. And in that last Durga Puja season, there's a very beautiful sense of his suffering, which is real, the concern and worry of the people who come to him, and somehow beautifully finding that the mother is present in all of this. And that although it's a mystery why Sri Ramakrishna or anyone would suffer terrible throat cancer and be suffering so terribly, there was a very deep and strong sense I found in these days of Durga Puja 1885 of somehow the meaning of the suffering was to expand the community and to leave no one out, whether their sufferings were physical or mental or psychological or spiritual. It sort of all began to come together. And it's very compact. If you look at the Gospel for 1885 October, the season connected with Durga Puja and then right after Durga Puja is October 18th, Sunday, and then Friday, October 23rd, Sunday, October 25th, and then finally finishing on Monday, October 26th. And what I'll do now is just offer a few reflections on these days. So it's really 1 week in which before, during, and then just after Durga Puja, there's a reflection on the meaning of life, the meaning of suffering, the meaning of the compassion of God. The setting is simply given in chapter 45, which is set on Sunday, October 18th. As it indicates, it was the 4th day of Durga Puja in that year, 1885. And the scene is rather mundane for any of us who've known someone who's suffered from a terrible disease, anyone who's suffered from cancer. All the doctors are agreeing that the illness, the soreness in the throat of Ramakrishna was cancer, and that his situation was getting worse and not better. So in a mundane diagnosis that anyone might hear, anyone might think about, I'm sure we've all had family members or friends who've suffered in some way from cancer or something like cancer. Something has to be done for care for him at this time. And out at Dakshineshwar, it was very difficult. It was too far outside the city, things weren't going well there, it was too hard for people to come and go in a convenient way. So they brought him into the northern section of Calcutta, to the Shampuhur section, and the master was there now living in a rented house that his devotees had brought for him. And he was under the treatment of Dr. Mahendralal Sarkar. And I'll have more to say about Dr. Sarkar and what follows. But it begins by simply saying he's there in the house, he's suffering from cancer, his disciples are concerned, the doctor is coming every day. And as a note of sadness, on Vijaya Day, the fourth day of the worship of Durga, the image of Durga is going to be immersed in the water, and in a sense dissolve and go away. And the devotees are grieving that the mother is going to leave them in this physical form. They know it's not the only form of the mother, but there's a certain sense as we enter the Durga season, according to the gospel, that there is a sense in which something is being lost of the physical manifestation. The image will be taken away and dissolved. And I think they're already thinking in their minds, so too Sri Ramakrishna, the avatar, he is beginning to dissolve before their eyes. He himself is beginning to pass away in this holy season of the mother. The scene is described very beautifully also in the Great Master. So Saradananda's text, I think about the same week of period. At the end of 1885, the people were filled with joy and enthusiasm at the great autumn worship and festival. And although the current of that bliss was particularly felt in the hearts of the Master's devotees, there was one great obstacle. Namely, for he in whose company they felt the surge of delight, he was seriously ill. The master had cancer of the throat. They were hoping that with the best doctors and best medical care, he would get better. But as it says, the disease had shown no sign of abatement so far. On the contrary, it was getting worse day by day. But it points out that also that technically, according to the medicine of the time, when he would go into samadhi, which was quite frequently, if you know from reading the Great Master and the Gospel, that somehow the energy in his body would rise up within him. And that this was considered by the doctors to be dangerous because this would agitate the throat and agitate the cancer. And they kept telling him, don't do that. Don't have these religious experiences. Don't have samadhi, but let it be calmed down. But for Sri Ramakrishna, there was no thinking of that because the experience of the mother so enlivened him that the power was rising, even if it was ruining his body at the same time. For it says, unlike ordinary people, he failed to regard as precious the body. He looked upon the body as if he did not care, as if it was merely a trifling cage of bone and flesh, from which he had already withdrawn his mind. And I think this is a profound point, and you may know, again, people who in their last days in time of suffering, some people are entirely caught up in the suffering, and everything is about getting the pain relief, getting the sedative, getting some kind of care to take away the pain. And others seem to somehow, in the pain, in the body, transcend. And that there's kind of a spiritual reality that comes to the fore, even in times of great trouble. Ramakrishna was one of those. That as the situation got worse, in a sense, his spiritual experiences became all the purer. And I think this was the mystery that this section of the Gospel of Ramakrishna is trying to talk about. How it is that as the Master was declining, as his pain was growing, how could it be that at that point his power, his Shakti, the power of the Mother through him was being manifest even more greatly? And these days of Durga Puja seem to be a time when very strong consciousness of the power of the Mother and the suffering of cancer were like one reality and not two. it goes on Friday, October 23rd, which is the full moon just after the Durga Puja. There's reflection on why is it that people suffer in this world. And one would think you could point to easy diseases, so cancer, tuberculosis, strokes, heart attacks, gout, other diseases of body that would cause somebody to suffer. But there's a long discussion between Ramakrishna and Dr. Sarkar, who's a very philosophical medical doctor, about how ego is the cause of all suffering. And because the ego is a twisting and distorting of the body, that if somehow one can become free of ego, ahamkara, then somehow then the sense that the body is passing will no longer be a distress or a fear to you. But you can actually transcend even in the suffering body by not clinging to it, saying, my body, my good health, I want to be better, I want to be better. Let it go, let it not matter. A beautiful passage is talked about that Ramakrishna knew that he was suffering. He didn't pretend everything is okay. And it said that in times of suffering, he would see God so near to him, the mother so near to him, that he would converse with the mother. When suffering from illness, he would say to her, like a small child, "Oh, mother, this is hurting me." And as a small child is not self-preoccupied, is not demanding, here are a list of things that I need for my care, with great simplicity and trust, the child goes to mother. And Ramakrishna seems to be saying, yes, I am suffering, yes, there is a problem, but I know that my mother will take care of me. And the mother in this Durga Puja season was keeping him in the world that he might understand better in the world how this would work. There's a scene given in the same chapter during this Durga Puja where it talks about he went to he's praying to the mother. I was sitting in the Kali temple. I was very ill. I felt like praying to the mother to cure my illness, but I couldn't do so in my own name for my own sake. Perhaps there could be some benefit, some cure for the world around me, but I can't say, I, Ramakrishna, I'm your child, you please cure me. But rather simply, it is what it is, and mother, I show you myself. And he gives the image of going to the Museum of the Asiatic Society, and they had a skeleton there, a human skeleton. And he's observing the skeleton that all the bones are in the right place and his body is in some posture, but there are all these little wires and things holding the bones together. And he's telling the mother, hold my bones together, hold my body together longer so that I can be here and help your servants, help the seekers, help Narendra, future Vivekananda, and others to find their way. Almost as if, say, I'm like a puppet in your hands, that my body is suffering, but keep me, allow me to live, have not compassion on me by curing my illness, but through me have compassion on your children. And that is why I will stay in this world. So it's very beautiful. And then for some reason, right after that, it suddenly turns to the life of the Buddha. And the disciple Ramtaran, I think that may be the way to pronounce it, Ramtaran, had gone with Dr. Sarkar to see a play about the life of the Buddha in Calcutta, based on Edwin Arnold's Light of Asia. So a play apparently in Bengali, I don't know if it's been translated. And he says, Dr. Sarkar says, why do we call him an incarnation of Vishnu? I think the Buddha should be called the incarnation of compassion itself. And so the theme of suffering and compassion come to the fore, and this disciple Ramtaran begins to sing songs from the play. It must be very beautiful. And I'll just give you a little feel of it because it's quite long. We moan for peace and rest, alas, but rest can never find. We know not whence we come, nor where we float away. Time and again we tread this round of smiles and tears. In vain we pine to know whither our pathway leads, and why we play this empty stage. We know not who we are, nor whence it is we come. We know not why we come, nor where it is we go. Sharp woes dart forth on every side. Like water in a stream, we do not stay at rest. Onward we flow evermore. We cannot stop. And it's a perfect evocation of the mystery of the Buddha, the sense of the flow of life, the flow of karma, how in the ordinary world before enlightenment people are lost, people don't know their way, and that somehow everything has to be changing not by medicines, which can be very helpful, but by changing one's view of self and world and body to realize that the flow of life, life and death, go on and on. And I think this could be a very different presentation by somebody else perhaps, that at the Durga Puja 1885, in the midst of Ramakrishna's devotion to Kali, calling on the mother in the time of his cancer, suddenly the story of the Buddha is told, the Buddha of compassion. And I think there's a sense of generosity here, that it's not sectarian, it's not competitive, but that a like-minded soul to Ramakrishna himself was the Buddha, who not only was a wise teacher, but faced up to the suffering of life and brought consolation to many, many, many people. And somehow I think the author is saying that this was true of Ramakrishna in those last days. His compassion was overflowing in a way that the Buddha himself would have recognized. After reciting the hymns about the Buddha, Ramcharan then sings several hymns to the mother, to Mother Kali. And this is quite beautiful. Again, I'll only read you part of it. O Mother, you are the savior of the helpless. You are the slayer of sin. In you the three gunas dwell, sattva, rajas, tamas. You create the world, you sustain the world, you destroy the world. Sankhya, Patanjala, Yoga, Mimamsakas, Nyayakas forever seek to know you, to know your inmost nature. Vedanta, Vaisheshika seek you out, but none of them has found you so easily. Though free of limitations, without beginning, without end, for the sake of your devotees, you wear various forms. All the terrors of this world you do remove. You dwell among us, past, present, and future. And I think this really brings home that, again, we're not Buddhists in the life of Ramakrishna at this point. The compassion of the Buddha is now transferred to the compassion of the mother. And the last line that I read, I think, really captures some of this. The terrors of this world you remove. You dwell alike in past, present, and future. And if we think of the flow of our lives from when we are young and things are going well, or we have losses when we're young, but we go through the fullness of life and then we begin to get old, somehow saying, Mother, all of this is your presence. And the great philosophers, the great thinkers may not understand this. They look into the problem of suffering, the mystery of evil and so on, as that's their job to do. But somehow if you go to the mother and realize that everything is in her hand, everything is in her compassion, you will realize she is the one who takes the terror out of the world. I don't know the original Bengali, but taking the terror out of the world is, again, and not waving her hand and there'll be no more suffering, but fear of suffering can be taken away. And that, I think, is a beautiful point that, again, the Buddha would understand. So then we move a couple more days to October 25th, Sunday, October 25th, 1885. The story continues in that same chapter of the Gospel of Ramakrishna. Dr. Sarkar comes to see Ramakrishna early in the morning, possibly as early as 7 a.m., before 7 a.m. in the morning. There's a complaint later where the doctor says, I'm losing my livelihood because instead of caring for all my other patients, I keep coming to see Ramakrishna. I spend all my time with him. And he even suggests, I'm not sure whether I'm the doctor healing him or he's the doctor healing me. But in any case, he's there on a Sunday morning, perhaps 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning, again admitting this is not a good situation. The cancer is not going away. The cancer is not being cured. Things are not being forgotten in a way, but it's real. It's there. And you see it early in the morning. And they talk a bit. They talk about suffering. They talk about dreaming and sleeping and waking, the mysteries of life. And then Ramakrishna says, to Narendra, who will become Swami Vivekananda, why don't you sing for us? And Narendra sings. I guess he had a beautiful voice. And he sang for Ramakrishna and Dr. Sarkar and the others present. Sweet is your name, O Mother, refuge of the humble. Your name is like the sweetest nectar on our ears. It comforts us, beloved of our souls. The priceless treasure of your name alone is the abode of immortality. Whoever chants your name will not die. Falling upon our ears, your holy name instantly slays the anguish of our hearts. You are the soul of our souls. You fill our hearts with bliss. And again, a very beautiful and simple prayer that, again, problems of life don't go away, but when we hear your name, Mother, it takes away our fear, it takes away our trepidation, it takes away the anguish in our hearts, that we're no longer afraid of what is happening to us. Why? Because you are the soul of our souls. You fill our hearts with your bliss whenever we call upon your name. So again, the Mother is permeating this whole section as appropriate to the Durga Puja season. And I think that becomes very important. And then the next hymn is most interesting, and maybe later Swami can say to me why this hymn is so popular. But I counted that when Narendra turns to this next hymn of Ram Prasad, the great poet of the previous century, it comes up at least 8 or 9 times in the Gospel of Ramakrishna. It's a beautiful hymn, and you'd have to know the Bengali to appreciate it. I'm just reading the translation, of course. But it's a crazy hymn, literally a crazy hymn, because it's about lunatics and about craziness. And somehow it seems that Narendra, Vivekananda, is inspired in the midst of this meditation on suffering, the life of the Buddha, calling upon the Mother's name, removing your anguish, to recite this hymn, which is about the 7th time it's been recited in the Gospel. And I'll read you the whole thing. It's very beautiful. Make me mad with your love, Mother. There is no use of knowledge and discrimination. Make me intoxicated with the wine of your love, Mother. You are the enchanter of devotees' hearts. Immerse me deeply in the ocean of your love. This world is your lunatic asylum. Some laugh, some cry, others dance in excess of joy. Jesus and Moses and Chaitanya, O Mother, they became unconscious in ecstasy of love. So it kind of overflows into the other great figures of world history. O Mother, when shall I be blessed, mixing with them? When will I lose consciousness? When will I be ecstatic in your joy? In heaven there must be a great gathering of lunatics. There, master and disciple are all alike, dancing before your presence. Who can understand the mystery of this great play of love? O Mother, you yourself are mad with love. You are the greatest of the lunatics. Make me rich, O Mother, in the treasure of your love. And I think, again, this is when we talk about the compassion of God in the Mother. Again, it's not simply, I feel sorry for poor people, or I feel bad when I read the newspapers and see people suffering. But somehow this sense of suffering with, being with in suffering, overflows into what seems crazy in the world, a sense of joy in the midst of that suffering, a sense of the ability to see God's presence in all the bad things as well as the good things of life, a real kind of existential non-dualism, where it's not simply, this is good, this is bad, let's go for the good, let's avoid the bad, but somehow in the presence of the Mother, it's all interconnected, and the boundaries of ordinary life fall away, and it seems crazy. Again, all these great spiritual beings are lunatics. Why are they lunatics? Because they don't calculate the world the way other people do. And of course, the greatest lunatic in 1885, at the end of Durga Puja, was Ramakrishna himself, who should be closing the door, having more doctors around him, caring for his throat cancer, not speaking for 6 months because it'll cause distress to the throat. He's dancing, he's going into samadhi, he's singing. All of this is somehow, yes, this is where the Mother is, not curing my cancer, but teaching me to show my cancer as a way of connecting people with the Mother. And that's a beautiful thing. By note, I found a note that one of the great early Swamis, Swami Turiyananda, used to sing this hymn when he had trouble getting to sleep. So try that in English and Bengali if you have trouble getting to sleep. But when Vivekananda sings this hymn, again, it's like the 7th or 8th time in the Gospel, this is what happens. When he finished singing, a strange transformation came over all the devotees. They all became themselves lunatics, as it were, filled with divine ecstasy. The pundits stood up, forgetting the pride of his scholarship, and cried, "Make me mad, mother. There is no use of knowledge and discrimination." And then Vijay was on his feet, carried away by divine intoxication. And then Sri Ramakrishna himself stood up, and to quote, forgetting all about his painful and fatal illness. A few minutes before, he was prone in the bed, he could barely get up. And suddenly he hears this hymn, and it opens up the door of the mother's love and compassion. He forgets about his painful and fatal illness, and he's up on his feet dancing in ecstasy. And the doctor himself, this rationalistic Dr. Sarkar, who had been sitting in front of Ramakrishna, also stood up. Both the patient and the physician, and again, which is which at this point? Is Ramakrishna the patient and Sarkar the physician, or is it the other way around? Who's helping whom? The patient and physician forgot about themselves in the spell created by Narendra's music. Naren and Lachu went into deep samadhi. The atmosphere in the room became electric. Everyone felt the presence of the mother. And so one of these, notable ecstatic moments that happened so often in the latter part of the gospel and the great master was happening. And again, it's gathering around the man who's dying, who calls upon God as his mother, and that overflows into helping all those seekers, all those disciples, all those who came to him to no longer be afraid of what is happening, because the mother covers past, present, and future. It goes on, and I won't read all of this, but Dr. Sarkar, there's a follow-up scene, because the gospel, as you know, can become very philosophical at different points. And Ramakrishna and the doctor are standing there, and they're both kind of in samadhi, and then as they come down, you can see the doctor's mind clicks back on and said, "What did I just see? What was going on here among the disciples of the master?" And it says, Dr. Sarkar, the famous scientist that he was, he stood there out of breath, watching this very strange scene. He noticed that the devotees who had gone into samadhi were utterly unconscious of the outside world. They were motionless, they were transfixed, and after a while, as they came down a little to the plane of this relative world, some of them were laughing and some of them were weeping. An outsider entering the room would have thought that a number of lunatics were assembled there. So the song comes true. Oh, lunatics, everybody's a lunatic. Everybody like Ramakrishna, Jesus, Chaitanya are lunatics. Suddenly, the overflowing grace of the mother made them all lunatics for a moment. And the author sort of saying, bravo, that's the way it should be. And the doctor says to Ramakrishna, I must say that all of this is entirely natural. Nobody is faking it. It cannot be a hoax. These people have actually experienced this. And then he says about himself, he says to Narendra, when you sang the lines, "Make me mad, my divine mother, there is no use of knowledge and discrimination," I myself could hardly control myself. I too was about to jump up and start dancing. With great difficulty, I controlled myself and I said, "No, I am a doctor. I must not display my emotions." And you can see he's like holding himself down. And Ramakrishna says, oh yes, you are just like Mount Meru, oh doctor. You're motionless even though you are great and you are deep. And goes on to talk about that, how some people's love is sort of burning around them, but when particular emotions come up, like tears and dancing and singing, it sort of burns it all away and they sit there motionless. But the interesting point again is that at this point, yes, Ramakrishna is dying. The only reason Sarkar is there is because he's trying to care for this hopeless case, a person who's will be dead in a few months. And yet suddenly he's being advised and counseled about what kind of person he really is. And the very empirically minded, well-trained Dr. Sarkar sees that when you begin to believe in the mother and allow her love to overflow, that changes people, that they no longer fake their religiosity, but they actually are religious. And while they may have all their aches and pains that they had the day before, they're no longer afraid, they're no longer anxious, they're no longer bitter, but they simply accept it and say the mother is in all of this. A short afterword, and then I'll just make a few conclusions, and either we could stop or we could talk about it a bit if anyone had questions. So the final chapter that talks about this at all was simply chapter 47, and which is set on Monday, October 26th. So the next day, after this extraordinary Sunday scene. So about 10 o'clock in the morning on that Monday, Dr. Sarkar comes to check out on the master's condition. But it says very bluntly and very kind of matter-of-factly, Dr. Sarkar declared again that the illness was incurable. His words cast gloom over the minds of the master's disciples and devotees. With unflagging devotion and zeal, they nursed the patient. They tried to save him from the inevitable. People were flocking to the master day and night, probably making his condition worse, not better. And in spite of the excruciating pain in his throat, he welcomed them all with a cheerful face. There seemed to be no limit to his compassion for their welfare. His face beamed whenever he talked to them about God. And Dr. Sarkar said, "I forbid you now to talk to these people anymore. You'll only make your illness worse." And then he adds, "The only person you can talk to 6 or 7 hours a day from now on is me." Dr. Sarkar. And it's almost like a joke at this point, saying, you know you're not going to get Ramakrishna to stop caring for the people around him. You know that the more they come, the more he opens up and pours out the mother's compassion. And the more that happens, the more his throat is irritated, and perhaps it speeds up the process. And the doctor himself is so almost amusingly ambivalent here. You shouldn't talk to them, but I can't bear to not have you talking to me. And somehow in the heart of this mystery, and you might think of holy people who are in their last days, who when they're cared for by health professionals in hospitals and hospices and so on, they end up doing more good for the doctors and nurses than the doctors and nurses can do for them. And I think that's really what this compassion of the mother is about. Not that the mother comes down, from outer space or something like that and cures the illness, but rather the power of the mother in the body that is suffering, in the life that is ending. If the person has no ego, if the person has no fear, has no anger, it opens up and becomes a great healing power for other people in other ways. So I would conclude simply by saying, if you go back to where I started, my parish in Sharon, Massachusetts earlier today, that there's a sense that different masters in different ways face up to the problem of suffering. Jesus, on the road with his disciples, has to keep disabusing them and saying, you're looking for perfect happiness, you're looking for, he didn't say it, but a Hollywood ending, happily ever after. But I'm telling you, it's on these dirty, dusty roads in these small towns where I'm endlessly walking around, helping people, curing people, teaching people, on my way to Jerusalem where they will crucify me. That's what my mission is. And somehow we find that Ramakrishna, in the same way, is able to open up the compassion of the mother in his life, in his last days, in Calcutta. And I think it's partly then to the mystery of Mary, the mother of Jesus, who I didn't say much about, but I think she comes back in at this point. One of the last verse of that hymn I mentioned, the Stabat Mater, the beautiful hymn of Mary watching her son die, and then all the devotees turning to her and begging for her to help them. The last verse is this: "Guard me by the cross, O Mother. Protect me by the death of your Son, Christ. Cherish me with his graces, so that when this body dies, you can make it happen that my soul is given over to the joys of paradise." And what was true through Jesus, who died on the cross, now has been transferred, behold your Son, and the whole world becomes the children of Mary. Jesus is dead, Jesus will rise, Jesus will return to heaven, but the mother is always there. So go to the mother in your trouble, and she will heal you and make you well. And I think this for me, therefore, means that I learned something today. Because back where I was in Sharon, talking about Jesus caring for the suffering, caring for people in trouble, as he made his way to Jerusalem for the cross and death and resurrection, it's very easy for a Christian to say, well, that's where suffering was dealt with. At the cross, at Calvary, when Jesus died for us. But I think what I've learned from this scene is that Ramakrishna wasn't assassinated. He wasn't rounded up by the British and put in prison and killed for being a holy man. But that in a very mundane way, as terrible as it was, he had the kind of disease that other people get. He's one of many, many people in 19th century who died of cancer. He's one of many people who died of throat cancer. But what he did, instead of it being the marvelous, wonderful act of crucifixion, glory, transformation, and resurrection, was to show that even if you are an ordinary person with ordinary suffering, even if you are in the midst of things that you can't change, look to Ramakrishna because of his belief in the Mother who can transform even your ordinary reality. And so I'd like to close by reading the other passage in the Gospel of John where Mary is mentioned. So at the beginning I mentioned Mother Mary at the cross, behold your son, behold your mother. But there's actually an early passage in chapter 2 of the Gospel of John that opens up the whole thing in a different way. And I'll just read you part of it. Now on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. The mother of Jesus was there, and because of her, Jesus and his disciples had been invited to the wedding. But the wine was running out, and his mother said to him, "They have no more wine." And Jesus replied, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? It is not my time for miracles." But the mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." And nearby there were 6 stone water jars, the kind used for ceremonial washing, and each jar held about 30 gallons of water. So these are big, big jars. So that's 180 gallons of water that are in these jars. Jesus tells the servants, "Fill them with water to the brim." And he said, "Now take some and bring it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water and saw now that it had become wine. And he did not know where it came from, though the servants knew. So he called over the bridegroom and said, "Look, at a wedding feast, everybody brings out the good wine first, and then the cheap wine when the guests are all drunk and they don't know the difference anymore. But you have saved the best until last." What Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of his signs through which he revealed his glory. And the reason I close with this, which is hardly about suffering, they may all have a hangover the next morning of drinking too much wine, is that somehow the realization that I learned from Ramakrishna in those last days in Calcutta, back in ordinary life, the compassion of the Mother overflows in helping people to be happy, helping people to overcome their loneliness. Poor people who don't have enough wine or enough food for the feast, helping them to celebrate all the more abundantly. The mother intervenes, and she says to her son, "Look, you have come into the world, you have come to do great things, but here you are today, and the wine is running out." And the tone we get is Jesus looking at her saying, "Is this why I came, to make wine? No, I'm not ready for it." But he must change his mind then, because again, he does this miracle and they have 180 gallons of the best wine possible. And I think this is the compassion of the Mother, now transformed into everyday compassion. And while we can't ourselves live up to the highest possible ideals and do the greatest things and the greatest salvific acts unless we have a special grace, in our ordinary lives, when we have our aches and pains, our ups and downs, our families suffer in this way and that way, we can do things to bring a little bit of the joy of God to people. The joy of the Father, the joy of the Mother, the joy of Christ, the joy of Ramakrishna, to help people to outgrow their sorrow and to live with joy, to live in the bliss that God wants to give us. So I don't know if this actually is what Swami expected me to say, but I did my best. So thank you all for listening.
Any questions, friends?
Be happy to take any questions related or unrelated.
I have a question. Thank you for this wonderful talk. My question is a rather twofold question. It is the Durga, Kali and such forms of Divine Mother in Hindus. They are not human figures. They are kind of symbols. In the sense, there is no birth of Mother Durga, not date of birth or date of passing away. They are not human beings. They are the symbols of the Divine Mother aspect. Now Mary is a human person, mother of Jesus. Is there a concept in Christianity like Durga, Kali, which is the divine motherhood, non-human, but a conceptual divine motherhood there?
Wonderful question, thank you. I mean, on the one level, you're perfectly right that Mary is born and dies. And she has a special birth and a special death, but she's this embodied being on the earth. And Christians have trouble with this because, as you know, the Christian tradition generally calls God Father and not Mother. But I think in old texts, and even more recently, there is the twofold effort to call God, to think of God as the wisdom, or the wisdom that is with God from the beginning. You see this in the book of Proverbs, the book of wisdom, the wisdom of God dancing with God and creating the world. And many, many people say, well, that's the feminine principle, that somehow with God was this wisdom that is there from the beginning and is there somehow showing the presence. And others would say in the New Testament, in the time of Jesus, this then becomes the Holy Spirit. And this, scholars will debate this, and is the Holy Spirit feminine or neither male nor feminine? But the idea that you have the fatherhood of God, God the Son, and then the Spirit, which is not born in the world, doesn't die in the world, but in what is similar to ecstasy and samadhi, people overwhelmed with the Spirit and testifying in the Spirit, seems to be a similar experience where the Spirit of God infuses people's lives. And a lot of important theologians there are saying, think of that Spirit as very much like God the Mother, but not embodied in the world.
Thank you. The other question is that there are now Mother Durga, you alluded to Mother Durga, Mother Kali, and in the same 1 month there is also Mother Jagadhatri. So these three aspects really, they denote different things of the human understanding of, I think it is creating feedback in this. So they like Mother Durga is more for protection. Mother Kali is more for giving you liberation. And Jagadhatri, which comes exactly 1 month after Durga Puja, that is for like providence, sustenance. So is there some understanding in Christianity regarding these three functions of divine, say, fatherhood or motherhood? You have very nicely clarified that same, it should be called probably parenthood rather than just father. But are there such three different aspects or many more aspects to that?
I think, I'm very aware, as I think you are who are here today, we can make all these wonderful parallels between Hindu tradition, Christian tradition, and other traditions. They're never going to be 100% the same. And I think the idea of the creator, preserver, destroyer element, in a sense, Christians will say, oh yes, that's what God does. I mean, God creates life, God preserves life, God takes life away, God gives, God takes. So there's a sense that all of the functions, like the Trimurti, are given to God as God's own power. But another way is that this is diversified in Catholicism with the multitude of saints and the multitude of titles of the Virgin Mary, that somehow the power is dispersed. And so any of you who know anything about the Catholic tradition know there's Saint Joseph, there's Saint Anthony, there's Saint Bede, there's Saint Jude, saints you pray to for certain causes. And in theory it makes no sense because you say, well, just talk to God and it'll be much simpler. But somehow there are beings given roles for people who have lost something, for people who are sick, for people who are dying, for mothers when they're pregnant and having babies, all of this. And then the Virgin Mary has many titles. For instance, we had a few weeks ago Mary of the Holy Rosary, which is really Mary for praying every day with the Rosary, calling on Holy Mary, Mother of God, Holy Mary, Mother of God. And then in September, we had Our Lady of Sorrows. In August, we had the Assumption of Mary into heaven, which is really about her body and soul being lifted up in the fullness of reality. September 8th was the birth of the Virgin Mary. So there are Marian feasts sprinkled through the year. And I think the Catholic principle is to say, let there be many voices and roles for Mary, let there be many voices and roles for the saints, whereas you might say in some Protestant traditions, let it all be about Jesus and God, and not anyone else. And I think I've always found the resonance between Hindu tradition and Catholic, not exact, but the sense that there are many different ways that God manifests in many different people. Thank you.
I have a question.
Who? Upstairs.
Yeah, upstairs.
Yes.
My question has to do with the compassion of God. Does it extend to someone who dies in sin in the Catholic tradition? Is there any scope for that?
I think that's a very profound question that gets us into thinking about the relationship between spiritual good and physical good, and whether you can see physical illness as a punishment for sin, or whether somebody can somehow be, because of their sins, outside the compassion and mercy of God. And I think you can find places in Christian history, Christian theology even, where sinners get what they deserve. And that a person who is outside God's grace, who has cut themselves off from God, there's really no hope for them in their sin, in their suffering. It's like somebody like Judas in the New Testament who betrays Jesus and then dies a horrible death. But I think usually the better theologians and more profound spiritual thinkers say that the compassion of Jesus was never just for good people. And that, as the Gospels say again and again, I came for the sake of sinners. I did not come to save the healthy, I came to save the sick. And I think the message would be to try to get through to people who are in trouble. Let's say if we're talking Catholic, even if they've been away from the Catholic Church for 50 years, if they're in trouble, if they're dying of cancer, some other disease or something, that the compassion of God has no time limit, that it's always possible to come back. It might be in life, as we heard with the Gospel of Ramakrishna, that the problem at a certain point in life is not, you have cancer because you smoke too much, or you have this liver cirrhosis because you drank too much, too bad for you, but rather to say, as you suffer, return to spiritual values can take away your fear, can take away your anger, can take away your bitterness. You can be forgiven, and you can forgive those who hurt you in the first place. So I think there's an unlimited compassion for God, and humans can be far more stingy than God in terms of that compassion. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's a start. Thank you.
Are there web questions?
Yes, there is one web question. What's the relationship between an ill or weak body close to death and a more powerful manifestation of the Shakti, or the feminine aspect of God, and its compassion through it?
Well, my reading, again, because I always like to go to some text in order to think about this instead of generalizing, is looking at these chapters of the Gospel of Ramakrishna from October 1885. Seems surprisingly, when you get into it and read them yourself, because it can go quite deep if you go into it more fully than I did, that there seemed to be, again, a link here between the waning and diminishment and emaciation of the body of Ramakrishna and the manifestation of his spiritual power. That it seemed to be that more and more people flocked to him, either because they thought he's dying and we should see him before he dies, or because he will conquer death and he will be miraculously cured. But there seemed to be like the body was becoming less and less a barrier, and the spiritual sense of his light, his compassion were shining out. So in some ways, I think it would be a terrible mistake to say, therefore, people who are suffering terribly, if there's, they should be spiritual masters. You can't lay that burden on somebody by saying, look, you're dying of cancer, so you should be more spiritual. No, that wouldn't work. But when you get somebody like Ramakrishna or other great saints, I think of Pope John Paul in the Catholic Church, who his last years was suffering terribly from Parkinson's disease. He was all bent over in his wheelchair, but somehow still always seemed to have time to be listening, compassionate to people, and try to raise his arm to give blessings and so on. So I think my sense is that what is being taught in the gospel is that the diminishment of the body in a person who truly loves the mother allows the mother's power to shine through that body. Remember, Ramakrishna almost wanted to be like a puppet, like, mother, take over and use my body. That there's a kind of translucence where the body gets weaker and weaker and the light shines out. And Christians believe this too, that the power of God manifests in Jesus dying on the cross. So he's utterly helpless, he's utterly unable to control his destiny. He's there on the cross, and for 2,000 years, people have seen there is the manifestation of the power and the love of God in that terrible death. And again, I wouldn't make a theory of it, every terrible death is a spiritual good. That would be a terrible thing to say. But rather, if people are somehow able to be spiritual in the midst of aging, suffering, sickness, loss, then letting go of what happens around us, not thinking, I'll be successful, I'll be rich, I'll be healthy my whole life, realizing that it's all in the hands of God, the compassion of God, allows the spiritual to shine out in the time of suffering. At least, and I think that's what we're being taught, at least by the gospel, these chapters that I was talking about. Yes.
I'd first like to say it's very beautiful the way that you are able to marry Hinduism and Christianity so eloquently. But my question is that based on the fact that Christianity as a whole often espouses that it is the only way and that other religions are inherently blasphemous, how, as a Jesuit monk, have you found the ability to marry those principles without creating some sort of conflict in yourself that perhaps to speak so beautifully on Hinduism is, in a way, violating your own tenets as a Christian?
So that's a very good and difficult question. I would say several things. One would be, in my own personal experience, I first went to India. I went to Nepal first, actually, right after college, so almost 50 years ago. I went to Nepal, and over the last 50 years, in my studies, then becoming a priest, then in graduate study, then my teaching at BC, and now at Harvard, there's been a kind of an inseparable relationship between learning more deeply from Hinduism and being a Catholic and being a Catholic priest. So in some ways, I'd say to people, I'm just reporting on my own learning, my own experience, and I'm not making a theory that all religions are the same. I'm not saying that differences don't matter. I'm not saying that everybody has to have the experience I have, but that for the past 50 years almost, I have been learning from Hindu, and this is the kind of Catholic priest I am. Now, some people would say, well, that's too bad because we don't like the kind of Catholic priest you are. But nonetheless, for many people, I think it's okay, that it works for some people, not for everyone. The second thing would be, I try to avoid making major claims. Therefore, all religions are the same. Therefore, everything is true. Therefore, Mary is the mother, Mother Kali is Mother Mary. I try not to say things like that because those are the things that become very theoretical and very notional, that seem to catch the eyes of leaders, religious leaders who are worried about relativism or degrading differences to nothing. And that's why I did what I did tonight, which was rather than simply talk about God as Mother, the compassion of Kali, the compassion of Mary in general terms, I got very specific about my parish, the reading for Mass today, the statue of Mary outside, and nobody can deny that these things all happened today, and this was the Catholic Church, and then driving down here, and then saying, I'm not going to talk in general, but about these Durga Puja chapters in the Gospel. I mean, it sounds silly to say it's a kind of scientific effort, but it's kind of an experiment. So just be a Catholic priest, go to Sharon, say Mass, then drive down to Providence. Swami invites me, I give a talk reading the Gospel of Ramakrishna, and it's all harmonious. What I did in Sharon, I don't have to pretend that wasn't there because I then came to Providence, but rather there's a harmony between the two. And that anyone who would think that that is a terrible thing, I would personally say don't understand what they're seeing before their eyes. They don't understand the beautiful interconnections among religious traditions and are so worried about losing what they have that they think they own it like property. And if I don't hold on to it tight, I'm going to lose it. The final thing I'd say, and it could go on for an hour also, would be that the Catholic Church has been changing over the past 50, 60 years since Vatican II. So the Great Council of the Church finished in 1965, at which in the last major document, Nostra Aetate, in our age, the Church said, all the bishops of the world gathered, whatever is true and beautiful in other religions, we honor it. We see it as not incompatible with the glory of Christ. And for me, that opened the door to say, whatever is beautiful, whatever is good, whatever is true that I find in Hindu traditions, I honor that not as a Hindu, I'm not a Hindu, but as a Christian, I welcome it, honor it, respect it, rejoice in it. And I think that's what the Church is doing more. If you think recent popes like John Paul II, he goes to the Western Wall in Jerusalem, he prays with Jews. He goes to a mosque, he prays with Muslims. He's in India, he prays with Hindu leaders. In 1986 in Assisi, the birth of Francis of Assisi, he gathers all religious leaders and they're all together praying for peace. And he was no liberal. He wasn't a great liberal, but he realized this is the future. And Pope Francis, again and again, has said, our religious differences should not make it unable for us to work together to help people who are in trouble. And so he'll meet with an imam, he'll work with Muslim care workers with refugees. He'll go to Sri Lanka and work with people working with the poor Buddhists and Hindus, saying, what good are our religions if they divide us and make us unable to help people in trouble? So I think it's a growing, louder theme in the Catholic Church that would no longer say, because this is true, and there's 100% belief the Catholic faith is true, but that no longer means, therefore, every other faith is untrue. Or our job in the world is to get everyone in the world to become a Catholic. I think in practice and reality, we're not actually trying to do that, and we don't need to do that. But good question, thank you.
Can't thank you enough, Father, for this beautiful elucidation. As always, I have found his talks full of not just that scholarly erudition, but a lot of feeling and devotion packed in it. It was very inspiring to hear today the way I actually felt being transported to that time when this Sri Ramakrishna, 25th October 1885, and all those scenes going on, he was narrating them with such feeling that I got transported to that time, as it were, when he was telling about that Divine Mother's song that make me mad, amai dema pagal kore, that is the Bengali this thing, that really it brings how we go beyond this suffering in the world. So, thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and I hope that we will get to hear from him again and again. It is so. Yes, the last question that was raised about how will you reconcile these ideas. There are, of course, in every religion there are fanatic people. And so it becomes difficult for those who are really followers of religion as such, without any such compartmentalism. The compartments are good, but compartmentalism, that this thing alone is true, creates lot of problems. There are many ministers who have lost their congregation because being Christian and especially an evangelist, you cannot say that there is truth in other religion. It becomes so, they lost congregations. There are instances. We had another wonderful Christian preacher speaking from this pulpit. He had been, you know him, he has spoken. He also was at Harvard, Bishop Paul. And he gets all these messages. You have become a crypto-Hindu or crypto-Christian, and this is not, so as if it is a big problem. Anyway, but this is the nature of the world that we live in, so we have to progress through that. Gradually everybody learns to grow and see the truth in all other disciplines as well. Of course, it is natural. It is not that all religions are not same. Like all the different delicious food items are not same, but they all contain the nutritional elements, and that is, they are good for people. So it is from that angle, yes, there is the benefit and here is the example who takes the really beneficial, nutritional and delicious aspect of various dishes. And let us learn that from him, from Sri Ramakrishna. So I'll conclude after telling the next Sunday again. You know, we are going to have a special lecture. That was suddenly this had been decided that instead of Swami Yogatmananda speaking, we will have the speech of this Pravrajika Vrajaprana, and she will be speaking on the he alluded to Pravrajika Vrajaprana. She will be speaking on learning from the senior Swamis. When somebody else speaks, like today, I got the opportunity to ask question, you know. So otherwise I don't get that opportunity further. So I got the opportunity to ask question and learn from that. So next Sunday, please make it a point to come for Pravrajika Vrajaprana's talk. The Tuesday and Friday classes will go on as usual at 7:30 p.m. In person as well as live online. So you are welcome to join that. There are morning meditations, morning and evening meditation sessions. But you want to come for that in person. They are not online. So it is now I conclude with the closing prayers, and then there will be the evening arati, and then you can meet individually Father Clooney. That's it. May the Divine, who is Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Great Spirit of the Native Americans, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the all-loving being manifest himself unto us and grant us abiding understanding and all-consuming divine love. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.
Breaker of all our worldly bondage and adored by all, we adore you too. Stainless Lord, assuming human form. Stainless Lord, assuming human form, transcendent yet filled with love. You free us from the stain of sin and ornament our world. Consciousness is your form. Your eyes always purified by knowledge. Your eyes always purified by knowledge. Looking at them, illusion is gone. Ocean of shining love and feeling, ever inebriated in your infinite love. Your feet always dear to your devotees. Your feet always dear to your devotees. From our boat to cross this world, revealed to us as God incarnate and the Lord of all things, helping us join with you. Your mind's always set in the divine light. Your mind's always set in the divine light. This we can see through your grace. Destroyer of our worldly sorrow and compassion soul, infinite is your word. Your life's offered for the world's deliverance. Your life's offered for the world's deliverance, saving us from darkness and fear. your devotees, renouncing caste and birth. Our treasure is your holy feet, which take us very soon across this puddle of life. You give love and even-sightedness. You give love and even-sightedness to remove our anguish here. Our treasure is your holy feet, which take us very soon across this puddle of life. You give love and even-sightedness. You give love and even-sightedness to remove our anguish here. Greetings to you, O Lord, beyond both speech and mind. Greetings to you, O Lord, beyond both speech and mind. Yet you are the basis of both. O Lord, yet you are the basis of both. Great light of all lights, blazing in the heart's cave. Great light of all lights, blazing in the heart's cave. Darkness is destroyed by your light. Oh Lord, darkness is destroyed by your light. Greetings to you, O Lord, beyond both speech and mind. Greetings to you, O Lord, beyond both speech and mind. Yet you are the basis of both. O Lord, yet you are the basis of both. Great light of all lights, blazing in the heart's cave. Great light of all lights, blazing in the heart's cave. Darkness is destroyed by your light. Oh Lord, darkness is destroyed by your light. Langa ranga bhanga. These are all the sounds of mridanga. Langa ranga bhanga. These are all the sounds of mridanga. Spiritual songs devotees are singing for your worship divine. Spiritual songs devotees are singing for your worship divine. Jaya Jaya for your worship divine. Hara Hara for your worship divine. Shiva Shiva for your worship divine. Breaker of all our worldly bondage and adored by all, we adore you too. Jai Shri Guru Maharaj Ji Ki Jai. Auspicious and blessed, graciousness sublime, all noble ends you give to us. granting us refuge, all-seeing Gauri, O Mother Divine, our love to you. Creation, preservation, dissolution are your powers, eternal one. Nature's real basis, nature's essence, O Mother Divine, our love to you. We come seeking refuge from anguish. Be our Savior through your deep concern. All our suffering remove, Goddess, O Mother Divine, our love to you. Victory, O Mother Divine, our love to you. Blessed Mother Divine, our love to you. Blessed Mother Divine, our love to you. Blessed Mother Divine, our love to you. Jai Shri Ram Krishna Dev Ki Jai. Jai Shri Sarda Devi Ki Jai. Jai Shri Swami Vivekanand Ki Jai. Jai Shri Buddha Dev Ki Jai. Jai Shri Jesus Christ Ki Jai.